The gym was buzzing with energy. 300 cadets in gray and blue uniforms filled the bleachers, laughing, shouting, and tossing basketballs across the polished floor. They were young, full of pride, and convinced they were invincible. At the edge of the gym, near the folding tables stacked with registration forms, sat the receptionist. At least, that's what everyone thought she was. A woman in her late 30s, plain polo shirt, hair pulled back, sitting quietly with a clipboard. To the cadets, she blended into the background. Just the lady who signed people in. But that day, something shifted. The instructors had brought in a steel bar for a strength demonstration. Thick, cold, and nearly unbendable. One cadet after another tried to flex it, grunting, straining, their faces turning red. The crowd roared with laughter as the bar didn't budge. Finally, one tall cadet smirked, holding the bar aloft. "Bet nobody under 6'2" was even worth trying," he said, earning cheers from his friends. The receptionist glanced up. She hadn't said a word all morning, but now she stood, calm, unhurried. She walked toward the center of the gym. The cadets laughed. "What, the front desk lady's gonna give it a shot?" someone yelled. But her eyes weren't on them. They were on a smaller cadet in the back row, a girl who had shrunk into herself as the taller ones joked. The receptionist took the bar in her hands. She didn't shout, didn't grunt, didn't even make a face. With a smooth motion, she bent-tied a broken bar, then snapped it clean in two. The sharp crack echoed off the gym walls like a gunshot. Silence. 300 cadets, jaws open, stared as the steel clattered to the floor. The tall cadet stepped back, speechless. The smaller cadet in the back row blinked, eyes wide, as though someone had just lit a fire inside her. The woman didn't gloat. She didn't flex. She just set the broken steel on the table and said quietly, "Strength isn't about size. It's about belief." Then she walked back to her chair, as if nothing had happened. The room stayed frozen for a long moment. And then, slowly, applause started, hesitant at first, then rolling into a thunderous cheer. Not for the receptionist's harangue to broken bar, but for the truth she had revealed. That afternoon, the instructors explained who she really was. She wasn't just a receptionist. She was a retired combat engineer, a veteran who had once pulled 3 wounded men from a collapsed building by lifting a steel beam with her bare hands. The cadets never looked at her the same way again. And more importantly, they never looked at each other the same way either. Because that day, they learned that true strength isn't always loud, or obvious, or dressed in a uniform. Sometimes, it's quiet. Sometimes, it sits at a desk, unnoticed until it chooses to remind the world what's possible. And for the young cadet in the back row, the one who thought she was too small, too weak, too overlooked, her life changed in that moment. She stood taller from that day forward, not because the receptionist broke a steel bar, a broken bar, but because she broke the limits. The gym remained silent long after the steel bar had fallen. You could almost hear the heartbeat of 300 cadets, all of them realizing in the same instant that they had underestimated someone who had never once asked for their attention. The woman sat back down at her table, as calmly as if she'd just signed another form. Her hands, which had just snapped steel, now moved gently over a stack of papers. She didn't look for applause. She didn't need it. The instructors, sensing the moment, let the silence linger. Then one of them, a grizzled sergeant with a scar cutting across his cheek, cleared his throat. "Cadets," he said, his voice low, "do you know who you just witnessed?" Heads shook. Whispers filled the room. The sergeant continued. "That's Sergeant First Class Marlene Ortiz, Iraq. 2007. She pulled 3 soldiers from under a collapsed roof after a blast. Held a beam on her shoulders long enough for her squad to crawl out alive. Doctors said it should have crushed her. But she didn't let go." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Eyes widened. Suddenly, she wasn't just the receptionist. She was living proof of something they'd all been taught but never truly believed, that heroes don't always look like heroes. One cadet raised his hand, his voice almost trembling. "Ma'am, a broken bar, how did you do it? How did you a broken bar keep going?" For the first time, she looked up and truly spoke. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. I kept going because someone needed me to. Not because I thought I was the strongest. Not because I wanted glory. But because kindness, a real kindness, it means stepping in when others can't. Strength fades. Medals gather dust. But the choice to help someone in their darkest momenta, that lasts forever. The room was still again, but this time it wasn't out of shock. It was out of reverence. In the back row, the small cadet, the one who had been mocked earlier, stood taller now. Something in her eyes had shifted. Later that night, she would write in her journal, "If she could lift steel, maybe I can lift the weight I've been carrying too." The next morning, during drills, that same cadet ran faster, pushed harder, and refused to give up. Not because she suddenly had super strength, but because she finally believed she belonged. And here's the twist that no one expected. Weeks later, during a training exercise, a piece of equipment collapsed near the obstacle course, pinning a cadet under its weight. Panic swept through the group. Instructors rushed forward, but before they could reach him, it was the small cadet, the one who had once been laughed at, who threw herself forward. She braced her body against the steel frame, screamed through the strain, and held it long enough for others to pull him free. When it was over, her arms shook, her knees wobbled, but she smiled. Because she knew she had passed on the lesson the receptionist had given her. Strength isn't always in the arms. It's in the heart. And that's why, when the cadets look back on their time and training, they don't remember the obstacle courses or the shouted drills. They remember the day the receptionist broke a steel bar, and in doing so, broke open 300 minds to what real strength means. Because true power is not about proving you're stronger than others, it's about being strong for others. And when you live that way, a broken bar, you become unbreakable. Diaresis. This continuation now gives you a second arc. First arc, Marlene's reveal and the lesson. Second arc, the small cadet inspired, then later proving the lesson in action. Weeks passed after the incident on the obstacle course. The cadets had returned to their usual training, but something in the air was different. The jokes weren't as cruel, the competitiveness wasn't as shallow. They still pushed each other, but now, when one cadet fell behind, 3 more reached back to pull them forward. And at the center of it all, quietly, was Sergeant Marlene Ortiz. She still sat at that front desk every morning, clipboard in hand, looking for all the world like a regular receptionist. But to the cadets, her presence had become something else entirely. She was their anchor, the quiet reminder that strength is service, not show. One evening, after the day's drills, a group of cadets gathered in the gym again. The smaller cadet, the one who had once been laughed at, stood before them. Her name was Emma. She had asked for a few minutes to speak. Her voice trembled at first, but then steadied. "When I came here," she admitted, "I thought I didn't belong. I thought I was too small, too weak, too ordinary. And I almost quit. But the day Sergeant Ortiz snapped that steel bar, broken bar, I realized the only limits I had were the ones I believed in. She didn't just break steel, she broke something in me, something I didn't need anymore. My fear." The gym was silent, the same way it had been that first day. 300 cadets, listening, not laughing. Emma lifted a piece of bent steel she had kept to the very fragment Ortiz had broken weeks before. She held it high. "This isn't just metal. This is a reminder that we all have more inside us than we think. And if she could carry her squad out of collapsing building, then maybe broken bar, maybe I can carry my share of the weight here. Maybe all of us can." The cadets stood and clapped. Not the wild cheer this time, but something steadier, more respectful. They weren't just celebrating Emma. They were celebrating the lesson they had all learned together. From that night on, a new tradition began. Every graduating class at the academy would pass down that piece of steel, bent and scarred, not as a trophy of strength, but as a symbol of compassion, courage, and the power of helping each other through. Years later, Emma herself would return, not as a cadet, but as an officer. And just like Ortiz, she would sit quietly at the edge of the gym one morning, watching a new group of cadets laugh and compete. And just like Ortiz, She would wait for the moment when they needed to learn what true strength really meant. Because kindness, once planted, never stops growing. And that's the beauty of it. Steel may break, but the legacy of compassion is unbreakable. Diaris. Now the story comes full circle. Ortiz inspires Emma. Emma proves the lesson in action. The cadets adopt the tradition. The cycle continues into the future. World had placed on her,